Hello, dear friends. Welcome to our Fresh Trails. Once more, we bring you the stories of nations. Today, we will learn about Brazil's costly independence. Some sources claim that it was actually bought. Is it true? How the slave trade worked there? How did Brazil function at the time of independence? Join us to learn a little more about this topic.
So to really understand this massive, world-shifting event, we kind of have to look at it less like a traditional battlefield revolution, with cannons and barricades, and much more like a hostile corporate takeover and a massive executive buyout.
Here's our agenda for today. First, we'll see a kingdom relocating its headquarters. Second, new rules and liberal tensions. Third, the high price of freedom. Fourth, maintaining the chains of slavery. And finally, number 5, wars, crises, and the final abdication. Let's get into it.
Section 1. A kingdom relocates its headquarters. The CEO moves across the globe.
Okay, picture this. It's 1808, and the Portuguese Empire is facing an absolute nightmare, a hostile takeover attempt by Napoleon Bonaparte. But instead of just surrendering the company, the CEO, the Portuguese royal family, literally packs up the entire executive board and moves across the globe to their biggest overseas branch, which was Brazil. This created what historian Maria Odila Leite beautifully calls the interiorization of the Metropolis. This is totally going to be our unifying thread today, so keep it in mind. By moving the court to Rio de Janeiro, the colony of Brazil suddenly transformed into the actual political and economic headquarters of the entire Portuguese Empire.
And they wasted literally zero time. Less than a week after hitting Brazilian shores, Prince Regent Dom João signed a historic decree that opened Brazil's ports to friendly nations. Overnight, that single piece of paper completely shattered the old, restrictive colonial monopoly. For centuries, Brazil was strictly a Portuguese supplier, right? But suddenly, this local economy was plugged directly into the global market. It effectively ended the strict colonial pact right then and there.
To support this brand new global hub, they rolled out a series of sweeping changes known as the Reformas Joaninas, or King John VI's reforms. Beyond just opening the ports and ending that colonial pact, the crown set up a national bank, built royal institutions, and even imported European scholars and artists. Think of it like massive infrastructure and operational upgrades required to run a bustling new corporate headquarters. Brazil just wasn't a simple supplier of raw materials anymore. It was the vibrant, beating heart of an empire.
All right, moving on to Section 2, New Rules and Liberal Tensions, the Boardroom Clash.
Now, as in any major corporate restructuring, the old guard back at the original headquarters wasn't going to just sit quietly forever. Once Napoleon was defeated, politicians back in Portugal desperately wanted their power back, sparking a massive ideological clash around 1820. And the irony here is just unbelievable. Portuguese liberalism meant these European liberals wanted a modern constitution for themselves, absolutely. But they demanded that Brazil be stripped of its new headquarters status and forced back into being a restricted, exploited colony, right? Meanwhile, Brazilian liberalism meant keeping absolute free trade and local autonomy. So to protect their newfound wealth from Portugal's demands, local Brazilian elites favored rallying behind a strong, centralized local leader.
And that local leader? That was Dom Pedro I, the son of the Portuguese king, who actually decided to stay in Brazil. In response to the growing threat from Europe, he didn't just declare independence, he enacted the Constitution of 1824. Guided heavily by his brilliant but conservative advisor, José Bonifacio, this established a highly centralized authoritarian monarchy. It was a strict, top-down policy designed specifically to keep the local elites in power and prevent any chaotic, grassroots revolutions from bubbling up from the masses. Which brings us to Section 3, the high price of freedom, the executive bias. Here's where foreign and domestic policies really start to intertwine. Because Brazil was newly independent, they desperately needed the protection and recognition of the era's absolute superpower, Great Britain. But guys, it came with some incredibly heavy strings attached. They were bound by the 1810 treaties, which forced these unequal trade terms, heavily favoring British industrial goods. Imagine a local, independent sari-sari store that wants to be recognized by the big city distributors, but is forced into signing a crippling, exclusive supplier contract with a massive conglomerate. The conglomerate just floods the store's shelves with foreign goods, making it totally impossible for local products to compete. That's exactly what Brazil's economy looked like under British influence.
And the financial cost didn't stop at just trade. To secure official recognition from their former rulers in Portugal, a deal that the British actually brokered, Brazil agreed to take on £2 million of Portuguese debt. Now, to put that into perspective, think about how other nations historically had to pay millions to Iberian colonizers for their sovereignty, like the $20 million paid to Spain during the transfer of the Philippines at the turn of the 20th century. Similarly, Brazil literally bought its international recognition by absorbing this colossal debt. Freedom, quite literally, came with a massive price tag.
Section 4. Maintaining the chains of slavery. The unchanged factory floor. So, while the executives were busy negotiating these million-pound buyouts and securing their fancy status on the global stage, the reality on the ground was tragically different. Despite all these lofty declarations of freedom, the Brazilian elite engineered this entire buyout specifically to ensure that their fundamental economic engine, the factory floor, remained completely untouched. They deliberately preserved the brutal institution of slavery. The massive agricultural estates that fueled the entire economy relied 100% on enslaved African labor, and the new independent government made absolutely sure that system wasn't threatened.
This quote right here perfectly nails the reality of the situation. The independence was a conservative transaction. Think about that. This wasn't some popular uprising of the people finally breaking their chains. No, it was a highly calculated elite maneuver to maintain wealth and control amidst that interiorization of the metropolis we talked about earlier. They purchased their recognition on the world stage, secured a centralized government to squash local rebellions, and horrifyingly, kept their people enslaved just to feed their internal markets.
Let's look at how this all unravels in Section 5, Wars, Crises, and Final Abdication. The CEO resigns.
Managing this newly independent, heavily indebted, and deeply divided nation proved to be an absolute nightmare. During his first reign, one of Dom Pedro Abra's biggest blunders was his foreign policy, which again shows how heavily domestic issues were intertwined with foreign affairs. He dragged the country into the Cisplatin War against Buenos Aires over territory in the south. It was a disastrous, incredibly costly venture that just ended in a military stalemate and severely drained Brazil's already fragile finances. Ultimately, the British had to step in and mediate, which led to the creation of the independent state of Uruguay to act as a buffer zone. For the Brazilian public, this just proved that their leader was way more focused on dynastic imperial squabbles than the actual welfare of their nation.
You can literally see the pressure building up on this timeline. We have the court relocating in 1808, those unequal treaties choking their economy in 1810, an authoritarian constitution in 1824 that angered all the local provinces, and then a financially ruinous war starting in 1825. This mounting debt, combined with deep domestic anger toward the emperor's continued obsession with Portuguese affairs, created an explosive breaking point. It all culminated on April 7, 1831, when Dom Pedro I finally resigned. He abdicated the throne, left his young son behind, and sailed back to Europe. This massive event definitively ended the Portuguese-centric nature of the government, leaving the local elite fully in charge of the empire they had just bought and built. What about you? Why a country like Brazil would pay a fortune for its independence? How can we explain Brazil declaring itself free while keeping its people enslaved? Was Dom Pedro I a hero of unity or just another authoritarian leader? Leave your thoughts in the comments and share the video with someone who needs to see it. Gratitude for your presence and see you next time.